I'd like to welcome Dame Tsivia Tamara Review to Ealdormere at Home. Dame Tsivia is here to talk today on the early days of Ealdormere. So would you mind giving us a brief introduction of yourself and how you got started in the SCA?
Well, I live in Caldrithig. I'm the founder of the Bernice Grayling Althing, one of the founders, the person that brought the idea up here. And I am a part-time university professor. That's my full-time regular gig at the University of Ottawa. And my family was in Arizona from 1970 to 1973. My dad was out of town on business, and my mom saw this little blurb in the daily paper about a little medieval festival at a park. And so she, my sister, and myself, Lady Carolyn de Villiers d'Amberview, and our next door neighbor and her two kids. So we've got 2 adults and 4 kids, shoehorned ourselves into a Datsun B210. That's Nissan, the old days. And off we went. The adults weren't that interested, and I don't know what the boys did, but my sister and I were like hook, line, sinker, deck, boat. Yes! And it was the first demo of what became the second barony in the Kingdom of Aytenveld.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It would have been March or April of 1971, so that's AS5 coming on to AS6.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So you just dedicated yourself to going to all the events after that one?
No. I was 14. I mean, this, what happened to me literally couldn't happen now because of the laws and the legislation and all the rules about minors.
Right.
Now, I'd gone to this thing. It was an open demo in the park. I met one of my oldest and dearest SCA friends there, who passed away, I guess about 4 or 5 years ago, and his wife passed away this past year.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
One of the founders of Aytenveld. And so there were maybe 20 people at this thing, mostly from Phoenix and a few from Tucson. And I got this piece of paper about what the SCA was when the Kingdom newsletter down there was $2 a year, okay? And my dad came back a couple of days later, and I was like, burfle about this amazing club. Hand him the flyer. Now, keeping in mind, my mother had been there, okay? So she'd seen what was going on, and he's reading this thing, and there was a whole list of what we do. Pretty well the same kind of stuff you'd put out today. So we do, reenactment of sword and shield fighting. And we do we were doing equestrian back in those days, okay? And then we were doing rapier in those days. So it was the list of what we did back in the day. So, dancing and fighting and cooking and this and that and this and that and brewing and venting and this and that. My dad bellowed, "You're not going anywhere where a bunch of college kids are going to sit around and get drunk." But Dad, no! But Dad, no! So I had this bright emerald green quilted bathrobe with a little silver trim on the neck and the sleeves. It's about a 3/4 length thing. It's really terrible. And a zipper. And a kind of belly dancey type necklace that I kept in a bag. Oh, and a Crown Royal bottle bag turned inside out, so you didn't see the Crown Royal embroidered on it. And it stayed in my high school friend's car. And periodically, she and I would be going to the library to do some research. Dad didn't say for school. And we'd go to events that were in town. I mean, we couldn't go anywhere out of town because we were minors and, we couldn't be gone that long.
Yeah.
We didn't have the money for a full event. It wasn't local. So that's what we did. I wore the belly dance necklace as a kind of hair thingy jingly. Still have it in a box.
Oh, do you? That's fantastic.
So yeah, we snuck out. I snuck out to any local events I could get to.
Oh, that's awesome. Some people sneak out to go to parties and drink, and some people sneak out to go to medieval reenactment.
Yeah, and you know what? I wasn't interested in drinking. I was interested in all the other stuff anyways.
Yeah.
On the, I forget, whatever anniversary of the barony of Tyrjeskithir, which is Tucson. I was at the anniversary event. I actually flew down for it, and I presented the then Baron and Baroness, the barony, with 3 photocopies for their archives of that very first demo flyer.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Which nobody had.
Wow, that's awesome that you had that.
Yeah. Well, that's really important to me. It proves how far back I really go in the SCA, not just spinning tales, you know?
Yeah, you have physical proof now.
I do, and it's really old. I mean, thank goodness it's not Mimeo, so it's not that purple print, but it's really early photocopy when it was still putting, adhering little fluffy ink spots onto it.
Oh, yeah.
So it lives now in a glassine envelope to protect it.
Oh, that's awesome. So what was the thing that really caught your eye at that first event? Was it just everything, or was it one particular thing as a whole?
Oh, it was all the best of my interest in theater, and I mean, Robin Hood and the whole romanticized Western European high Gothic stuff, and oh my gosh, it was just that whole environment.
Yeah, there's a little magical, right?
It was, and it was everything I wanted to do anyways, because I had been very seriously interested in professionally going into theater.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, but that when we're all really young.
Yep. For sure.
That's what.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, my first event was a Huntsman's Harvest,
Mm-hmm.
and it took me a couple to get into it. It was actually my very first crown tourney that I went to that I really started to feel that like magic. It was after Britannicus and Isabel won.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I was just so elated. I was just so excited for them. And then when everyone broke into singing, it was just like, I'd never felt that before. It was so fantastic.
And they're both amazing people.
Yes.
I mean, they really, really are.
So, absolutely. I love them.
Good royals to say, yeah, I want to play.
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember you had mentioned to me that you would actually came from the mid-realm up to Canada, and you said it was a bit of a culture shock.
No, came from Aytonville.
Oh, right.
Up Canada, which is, in those days, was everything kind of the southwestern states all the way to, I forget whether Louisiana, I know Texas was still part of Aytonville. I'm not sure if Louisiana was, or if it was in those days the East, because there were only 4 kingdoms. So we went up to kind of pretty well the bottom of Callantyre, because Callantyre was mid-realm at those days. So yeah, my family went from southern Arizona. We'd been there. We were there for about 3 years. I'm originally from Montreal. And yeah, it was just change at every level. I was a Quebecer, and we settled back. And when we came back, we moved to Toronto. So, English, Canada, and Toronto, the good compared to Montreal, the inordinately cosmopolitan bilingual. I mean, keep in mind, we're talking about 1973 here. So It's a long time ago. And in the the culture has changed. The mundane culture has changed.
Yeah, for sure.
So it was, the SCA in all of Ontario was the one group, which is Everwick. And there was at the time a household where 2 or 3 people were in Hamilton, and married couple, and I think there was one more person. We're in Windsor. Windsor wasn't part of was still, it was all Ontario in those days. So we had one group, which was a shire of the Mid-Realm. And then we had this household spread across, kind of the southwest of the province. It was it. I got accepted to do my undergrad at York. And Everwick was based out of the University of Toronto. And most of them were graduate students and in the medieval studies MA PhD program or the Pontifical Institute. So they were doing, hardcore Finvar. A lady who at the time was Lady Gillian Duriel became Mistress Gillian. Oh no, she was Mistress Gillian Wolf's daughter and became Mistress Gillian Duriel. 3 or 4 others, and they were all mid-realmers. They were all, like Michigan, Ohio people who had gone up to Toronto to do their PhDs.
Oh, interesting.
And at York, unknown to me, because I know there are people who will pillory me for this statement. I'm going to be kind and say I'm not a Tolkien fan.
Mm-hmm.
I read all 3 of those books, and with a good editor, they'd make one really good novel. Shoot me now.
I'll be honest with you, I haven't read any of them, so I won't get on your case for that.
Oh, I was in my late 20s, early 30s before I finally read them. So York, unbeknownst to me, had a Tolkien club where they got together once or twice a month and they dressed up like, hobbits and dwarves and all that. And they realized that very quickly that kind of LARPy costume stuff kind of ran out of ideas of what to do, because it's a fairly finite universe, and there were no movies on those books yet. I mean, they were strictly based on books. And one of the gals from there, Lady Tyr, went to and caught a meeting and a fight practice at the U of T in the Quad. Came back to them and said, this stuff is a lot more fun. We should be doing this. And so they put flyers up on campus. I saw the flyer and I'm like, oh my God, there's a CA up here. My only contact before that, somebody from home gave me Count Sir Finvar's contact information. And I found him, and I knew nothing about Toronto. I think I'd been there 2 or 3 months, right? And I was in the far north end because, I'm at York, my family was in the north end. And he said, well, why don't you come over? And, in retrospect, it sounds like such a come on, and it wasn't. Why don't you come up and look at my armor? He's a count. He's a fighter, dude. There was nothing more to it than that. I'd never met the man. And he says, this is where my residence is. Well, where is it? It's on the U of T campus. It's near the Robarts Library. What's the Robarts Library? What's the biggest thing in the area? You can't miss it. And so I just moved from 3,000 miles away, girl, aims for the largest thing she can see from the payphone, where she found. And I aimed for the construction site that is now the CN Tower, because they were starting to build a big thing. 2 hours later, and it started to rain, and I couldn't find his place, and I didn't have another dime to phone.
Oh,
so
no.
I took the bus home. And so I didn't meet the SCA in Toronto for about another year until these flyers went out.
Oh, wow.
And I walked in, and I'd been in the SCA before, and they said, here, you be a seneschal.
Oh.
Okay. And that's how, at the time, it was the Shire of Norlande. Northlands, and now it's pretty well the footprint of Skeltergate.
Oh, okay.
And in North Toronto and suburbs north.
Right.
Yeah.
So what did being a seneschal involve?
In those days, it really was a lot easier than it is now. It's not an onerous job now either. But, a shire could be 5 people to exist independently in the SCA back in those days. So as with, most of the other offices through right across the organization, it was paperwork. Send in a quarterly report back in the days when we were using pen and paper, and you didn't write it on up and go send.
Yeah.
Don't a stamp in an envelope.
That's way too much work.
Well, and even back in those days, occasionally people whined about it.
What sort of things did you report on?
Well, what is local group doing? How many people attend, your meetings? Have you run any events at all this year? How many people attended? What was the scene? So it was just kind of a pulse rate of the health of your local SCA group.
Okay.
And if you didn't report, eventually somebody would say, look, we're going to pull your officialness as a local group. So somebody's got to send us something. You remember that half the household down in Windsor that I mentioned? That split house? They didn't actually have 5 people when they became a shire, because Ben Dunforth, which was the Hamilton part of that family, became a shire, and so did the family down in Windsor, and that was Starleaf Gate, which remains, as far as I know, a shire in the Mid-Realm. It made sense. There may be an international border, but they're all squired and apprenticed and protégé to people who are just across the bridge and stuff.
Oh, okay.
That's why, other than the group in London, there's very little of anything between them and like Hamilton.
Yeah, I noticed that actually.
That's why they made
like a little
that
chunk
decision.
there.
Yep, that tiny little spot. And they didn't have 5 people. They had somewhere between 3 and 4. So the husband and wife couple bought a membership for their Irish Wolfhound, Clancy O'Longstrider, who became their Minister of Arts and Sciences, because it was one office in the day. And somebody would, write up his report on the status of all things artsy fartsy, and they put a paw print down.
Oh my God!
I don't know that corporate ever learned that, but he was one of 2 or 3 paid members of the SCA who were given an award of paws over the decades by the Mid-Realm.
Oh my goodness.
So it really, at the local level, even now, it's easier insofar as, you keep an eye out on anything legal. You make sure that if there's going to be an event run, everybody who's got signing authority, is a paid member. You do some of that oversight. Right. You are frequently the person who books meeting locations, and a lot of that kind of paper. It's a low level administrative, but you're administrating for cool stuff for you and your friends, rather than large companies where you might not care.
Yeah, you're more planning kind of like a bit of a party.
Yeah, essentially, and our philosophy back then, and we used to say a lot of these things that I think are now embedded into the culture, but people don't say them anymore, was you worked hard to run a fun event in your own group so that your friends would have fun, and then they did the same thing for you. Right. So it was less about, we're going to hold an event so we can all have fun, and it was a lot more about recognizing the cooking and the cleaning and the site setup and, all the programming and the heralding and all the stuff that goes into a good event was fun work, so your friends would have fun and you'd have some fun. It was really kind of outward looking to make everybody else have a really great time, and then you might volunteer in another group. God knows how much stuff I put up and cleaned up and judged and 40 mumble years, but a lot of it was. And now I can go and have a lot of fun with my friends in their backyard. It was very much about having fun and learning at the same time.
Very cool. So what were the events like back then? Were they pretty small? Was it there's still like those big scale feasts or anything?
Depends on where and what. Events before we had the term Ealdormere, we totally baffled the Americans up here. We did, because there was a definite culture gap between what was then the group Skraeling all thing up here in Ottawa, and that was the name of the incipient canton of the incipient barony of Septentria. And so all of Ontario wanted to be one barony, and the Americans thought we were nuts because they're all independent, live free or die, and the notion of all wanting to be a unified collection of subgroups. They were like, don't you guys want to become baronies? No, not particularly. You know, and so that there are real cultural differences between the SCA in Canada, and I can say that because some of the things that we share with Avical, for instance, second Canada only kingdom,
right.
are unique to the Canadian culture in a way that the Americans are a little different. And so even up here, we had reasonable sized events, not in the very beginning. I mean, in the very beginning, if you got 25 people sitting down for feast, you were doing really well. But you could get, I mean, it wasn't very many years before we were getting 60 people sitting at feast, and 60, 70 people, maybe a little more, you know, attending the whole event. You know, and what did an event look like? We didn't, as I say, again, we didn't have rapier. We didn't have a lot of the activities that we try and all fold into an event now. So booking sites was easier because you didn't quite the same scope of facilities.
Right.
And, you know, cities and regions weren't trying to pay their way by upping, you know, club booking costs.
Yeah.
But yeah, we would frequently have either a sit-down feast or potluck. Potlucks in the beginning were a real big thing.
Yeah.
Might be either historical or kind of historically inspired.
Oh,
You know,
very cool.
potato salad, not so much. Avoid it. And just everybody pitched in, and everybody chipped in on working on stuff, and you know, it's when we got a chance to stretch your stuff at the local area level.
Yeah, for sure. So when did you start introducing things like rapier, and was there a lot of like arts and science at the start, or did that kind of come in a little bit?
Oh yeah, we have always, right back to the first couple of years, and I mean, I walk in at 5, okay? We have always had parallel and overlapping groups. We weren't in we weren't big enough to have subgroups yet. And so, you know, a lot of the fighters might also do some brewing, and people who were researching and making, you know, more and more period, that took a while, costumes. We didn't have as many metal workers doing jewelry and pewter casting, but you know, most of the metal workers were making armor, right?
Right.
So first you start dealing with the 2 or 3 big focuses. Cooking, always been part of most events. Fighting, in the southwestern kingdoms, it's called hard suit.
Oh.
We don't use that term out here.
It's a little pretentious sounding.
Yeah, no, it was hard suit. Well, they have a lot of the groups down there have hard suit, which is you know, heavy weapon, and rattan fighting, and rapier now, and a lot of them also do shinai and shinai practice.
Oh, I actually don't think I've heard of that.
Japanese martial art. They're bamboo. They're strips of bamboo made into samurai type swords, and it's a martial art. It's part of the legit Japanese martial arts system. And so if you go to, like, in Kanto Park, I think that's the one in Phoenix, we meeting will have 250 people. This is fight practice, 200 to 250 people. And some of them are doing rapier, and some of them are doing hard suit, and some of them are doing shinai. And then you've got tables, because it's a bit of a bowl at that particular location. And then everybody else are on tables around the periphery, and different arts and sciences are happening there for the 2 to 3 hours until the city turns lights off at 10 o'clock.
Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
Can you imagine? When was the last time we got 250 people at an event in this kingdom?
Yeah. Right? Fight practice is usually maybe like 10. I think the most we've had is like maybe 15 or 16 people. That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, you see, sometimes it's very location dependent. But yeah, arts and sciences. I mean, what was Scrail Caldrithic, this area, was very arts and sciences driven for a long time. Now, Viscount Sir Mordain Blackcloak, things would happen in the baronial seat, which was far more often down around Toronto than up here. Mm-hmm. And we'd do the 5.5-hour drive. We'd go to the event, and there'd be court. And inevitably, the Baron and Baroness would call up the armed might of Skraeling Althing, and Sir Mordain would stand up, and he would walk forward because he was our only fighter.
Oh.
I mean, I was kind of a standing joke for a few years. He and Graf Sir Hugo, who does not live here at all anymore, and I'm not sure he even plays anymore. He became a Count of Graf. He and Mordain, and I'm forgetting Finbar's third squire. 2 of his 3 squires in those days were all lefties.
Oh, wow.
Lefty rattan fighters. I mean, what is it? 1 in 10 people are a lefty. Yep. Finbar, as I recall, is a lefty, although he can switch. He's a good switch fighter.
Yeah.
And so we were cranking out, unbeatable rattan fighters out of this area because their first choice was left. Most people in other areas didn't have any lefties to practice with. Yeah. And it was bing, bang, and down they went. It's hysterical.
Wow.
So we had a somewhat unique fighting culture. Mm-hmm. And I was in the day I was the only person that was doing non-court period music, and that went on for a long, long, long time. So I was very isolated. My first choice of artistic work, and this was way, way, way long before we became the kingdom who sings. There was a lot of bardic in those days. My late best friend, Master Nain Nakrutre, who was also from here, ultimately was a professor of early English music at Carleton. He was the past Quince Kiltorim Naharin, which is the Irish worldwide culture organization. He was their Canadian national Celtic harp champion. And so he was very active bringing and feeding court music culture. Get people, I mean, that was one, because it set so much ambiance at a feast and court in the background before things start. Yeah. So music, whether court or popular historical, has always been part of the fiber here.
Yeah, I've noticed that about Ealdormere specifically. The music is such a huge thing here.
And costuming. I mean, how can you do this and not, I mean, Corpora, and I haven't read it in a long time, certainly used to say, an attempt at a pre-1700s costume. Hi there, bathrobe turned back to front. A lot of people went to their first events in those days with a pair of tights they got at something like Malabar Costume Shop in Toronto. So they're not nylons, they're actual dance tights. Mm-hmm. And then 2 bath sheets pinned at the shoulders with some, drapery rope as a belt.
Yeah.
And if you were really classy, you too would have a Crown Royal bag for a pouch.
That was sort of the official garb of that time.
Yeah, well, and Chinese flats. Chinese flats, which you can still buy at almost, any Chinese tourist store in Chinatown, anywhere in the country and beyond. They're just little cotton shoes. They were also called peasant shoes.
Oh,
Little
okay.
cotton and a strap, and they were relatively inexpensive, and they passed pretty well for period footwear. So we were like the army of Chinese flat-wearing people, especially if you were still a student and didn't have a budget to buy, period footwear.
Yeah.
That and motorcycle boots if you were a fighter.
Yeah. So what was it like trying to make those first pieces of garb? I know now you can just go to Fabricland and get linen or order it online. How hard was it to get in research and then get that period material to get the clothes?
People who were deeply interested in historical costuming and accuracy had a lot of challenges, and a lot of what you wanted to work with was very expensive. So, most of us followed the 10-foot rule, and the 10-foot rule was, if it looks good from 10 feet, wear it. My gosh, I was so thrilled the very first time I went to an academic conference in England. So that would have been, oh my gosh, 1993 or so.
Yeah, the year I was born.
There you go. Well, I got a bolt of fabric in the basement who's as old as you are. And I went to, oh my gosh, Shepherd's, I think it's called Shepherd's Cross. There's a really monstrous, kind of flea market, bazaar, like just crazy. Everywhere in the world that you can buy almost anything you want there. Usually all the legal stuff anyhow. And one place was just selling bolt fabric, and they had, it was probably sheet material. So it was a 60-40 cotton polyester blend.
Okay.
Which doesn't wrinkle as much as I'm wearing right now, which is 100% linen. And it was essentially block print. Each was about this big gold fleurs-de-lis. It was a fleurs-de-lis in 6-inch wide white fabric.
Oh,
and I was like, I'll take all of that, because it was, I don't know, a pound and a half, a yard.
Wow.
I shipped it home in the mail. So that, even as late as the early 1990s, finding something like that where you weren't doing your own block printing on a solid fabric was just a huge score.
Yeah.
It was hard. A lot of people did focus on dye work. So if you could get, we all wore a lot of cotton. There were secret pockets in the SCA, which if you traveled or like me, you were increasingly networked with people, and I'm talking before computers. People in different big city areas knew where they had good secret stuff. I'm not sure that and then everybody in Toronto calls it the Orange Bag Store. I'm not sure if the Orange Bag Store was around when I first came there. It might well have been. But you needed to know, the garment fabric section of Toronto. I didn't. I did 4 years at York, and then I booted out to Ottawa for a job. I've mostly been here ever since. But Chicago had the Aurora, it's funny, I'm remembering these things, the Aurora Bleachery, which may or may not still be, in existence. And they're a weaving mill specializing in 100% cotton for all kinds of, sheets and whatever other businesses, right? They were the manufacturing. So I went to something in Treguarty, which is the province of Treguarty, that's the Chicago area. And my friends whipped me out there, and by the pound, all kinds of period, 100% cotton by the pound for cheap chips. Thank goodness I had driven down with a friend, because the entire back seat of their car was my pile coming back to Canada.
Oh my goodness.
The Aurora Bleacheries, and again, I don't know if they're even still in business. There was a place in San Francisco, I think, called Thai Fabrics, and that's where you got raw silk and wild. In the day, $3 US a yard, and we were on par, or the Canadian was slightly higher. So, we get together and we all buy sometimes just the unbleached, and then you dye it once it came to Toronto or Ottawa, So when you knew where these super secret places were, because if you could go down to Thai Fabrics, apparently they had a whole pile of end of bolt by the pound too. So people who were doing costuming that were looking for more authentic and not just, whatever linen look polyester you could get at fabric.
Yeah.
You started a network with other people, especially at interkingdom events. And Pensick was, of course, in the day, the one and only.
Right.
Wool. There's somewhere like in Maine that manufactures wool by the yard. So you saw all these gorgeous Melton wool cloaks and stuff coming out of the East Kingdom. We're all like, where did you get that? Did you just ransom your child to pay for that? Oh no, you have to go to the blah blah place, right?
And then you ransom your child.
Wasn't that bad, but it was one of the few woolen mills that was still running on the continent.
Oh wow.
They're very few. Most manufacturing's offshore now.
Yeah.
Trim. This trim here. See here, bring it up to the camera.
That's gorgeous trim.
This amazing trim, which is an inch and a half. Yeah, probably about an inch and a half. They manufactured it, and was it Allentown, Pennsylvania, I think it was, Trim Tex, and it was the best not kept secret in the SCA. Callantyre Trim, Master Andrixos's business. That's where he bought his stuff wholesale. And if you lived up in Caldrithwick, if you go to Pensick, I can shoot down the 401 and then whip around, around Niagara Falls. Or you can take an extra day and you go straight down from Caldrithwick on, I forget if it's 81, one of these highways, and where we have to turn on 90 to go to Pensick was the town that Trim Tex was in. And so all of us used to go south, buy our brains out, and then continue on to Pensick.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and they closed shop probably about 10 years ago, give or take. And they, if Trim Tex as an entity is still in business, everything's now being made in Asia.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, hard to beat the prices that they're able to churn out over there.
Sadly true. But yeah, I have been selling off when the year that they started to close was they were selling off around Pensick time in order to close in the factory and everything.
Right.
So Lady Firstow and I, my former protege, and I did that trip. We had like dead bodies of plastic bags full of trim tied to the roof of my RAV4. It was hilarious.
Oh my God.
I don't know how we managed getting to war and then, back into Canada without these things flying off forever on the highway.
Oh, that would have been quite a sight, just having streamers of trim coming off.
Thank goodness it didn't happen, but it would have been one of those cartoons for the ages, that's for sure.
No kidding. Oh, wow. Oh, so what area of arts and science has been your favorite to work in?
Well, my first love has always been Bardic. I did my undergrad, as I said, 3/4 of it was World War II history. I did a double major in the end of the third year. I'm like, I can't keep doing this. And so, but my main major that I kept was English. Not as much historical stuff. I did 4 years with one of Canada's 2 premier folklorists, ethnomusicologists, an amazing professor by the name of Edith Folk, and she swears she did not marry that man for the last name. Folk music and folklore.
Oh my goodness, that's such a perfect mashup. No, she.
I know, it was hilarious. FOWKE. She was an Order of Canada holder for her research in historical early Canadian music and the evolution of English and Irish folk music in Canada.
Oh, wow.
I studied with her for 4 years and worked on a couple of projects after I graduated with her. I was, listening to Joan Baez and Buffy St. Marie and Gordon Lightfoot, and Master Hector came up with, I think he's the one that coined the term, because Canadian folk music is really its own thing. It's not the same as American, and it's certainly not the same as when you go overseas. Because the Irish do Irish music and the Scots do Scots music. And if you go to England, is it Northumbrian music? Is it Cumbrian music? It's all extremely regional. As I discovered at a conference, we were having a ceilidh, and I said, would you play blah? And they looked at me funny because it was a Scottish song and it was an English ceilidh. And they're like, well, that's when I discovered the depth of that difference. And I think it was Hector who coined the phrase can Celt for Canadian Celtic.
Oh, I don't think I've heard that before.
It's kind of a uniquely SCA what we do here amongst those of us who are seriously into the non-chord bardic stuff. Can Celt, Mistress Marion of Heatherdale, who yesterday received a Aurora Prize, which is the Canadian Speculative Fiction Award, for she's the first music and writer for her fantasy work. Modern Celtic stuff. So we're distinct. I mean, the Newfoundland sound, the Cape Breton sound, we have very distinctive folk music, and my involvement for folk music goes back to my beginning in the SCA, although not from the SCA. And there's a very small network of us who used to mail cassettes to each other.
Oh my goodness.
With stuff we were working on. And then I would listen to it and I'd send it back to my friend in Albuquerque or my friend in Washington State, because we were that small a group back then. But, my Laurel doesn't say Bardic Arts because we hadn't coined the term yet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. My Laurel is my kingdom level, which was mid-realm. My kingdom level artistic award is balladry and poetry. And my Laurel is balladry and research. And people go, research into what? And I was the first art and science Laurel in this kingdom.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, actually, mid-realm. And I said, I do research into isn't period. Every time somebody makes this grand thing, folk music isn't period, is how I landed up getting my Laurel in it, proving that they're not. I went back to Dr. Edith Folk, Order of Canada, and I said, excuse me, Professor Folk, is it true that we can't actually document English or Scottish or Irish or Welsh folk music prior to 1600 or 1650? And she bust out laughing. When she stopped laughing, she sent me to some of the heavy ass research books, and that's how I fell down that rabbit hole. So, pink isn't period. Oh my Lord, how many times costumers would say pink isn't period. At one point, it's about 25 years ago, both costume and non-costume Laurels threatened to do a flash mob at an Estrella war, and we were all going to show up in Barbie pink period garb and have our dependents handing out little booklets on all the documentation to these kinds of pinks as being absolutely historically accurate.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, because I still hear that now, even that pink's not period.
It's not true. Paisley isn't period. It's not this set. Some of my other trim has Paisley on. And I'm like, with my very own eyes, and I made the security guard nuts because I was right up here to the paintings. And it was Museum of Art in, I forget if it was St. Louis or in Indianapolis, because there was a painting of the Virgin Mary and baby, very typical, medieval Renaissance topic. And she has the quintessential, almost sky blue veil on, and it has gold paisley all over her veil. And it was like 1490 something, and I'm like, so yeah, I kind of got my laurel in debunking block isn't period.
That's awesome.
So historical cooking. I love redacting. I used to run the cooking guild up here, I guess, for 6 or 7 years at one point.
Okay.
So historical cooking and cooking research. There's the big advantage of being able to read at university level in French.
Right.
From Montreal originally.
Yeah.
Which means with a dictionary, I can also translate Italian and Spanish.
Ah.
So, there's really good historical cookbook research that's come out of those countries that debunks a lot of the stuff that are the truisms in the SCA about what foods and, and stuff like that.
What's one of the more interesting things that you found?
Oh my gosh. Actually, some of the most interesting stuff isn't stuff that I found personally. Although, like quince, I came up with a variant of a historical recipe from a form of curry, which is 12th, 13th century, I forget now, that Plain Delights did a version of. And English cooking matched up flavors that sound really odd to us today. Their palates were tuned differently because what was available, right?
Yeah.
And they're all, if it was a recipe, it was written, and if it was written, this is a noble family. So, your peasant wouldn't be eating most of these things. And I substituted, and I don't remember what fruit was in this really amazing slow cooked roast beef recipe. And I swapped out quince, which is a cross between a pear and an apple. It's a European fruit that doesn't get nearly enough play here. My grandmother and her aunt, her sister, both made a quince jam at home ever since I was a kid. So I'm very familiar with it. And I went, oh yeah, quince would go really well. And so I used, a little rose water and a little fig and the quince. I worked with fresh quince and the whole bit. And that, not only did that roast beef, it was a potluck, disappear. But people were then scraping off that thick, sticky, beefy gravy glaze off it, thinking that was the dish to go on their bread.
Oh my God. That's amazing.
I wrote the changes down in my copy of Plain Delight, so I can do it anytime I want. Some of the most really interesting cutting edge cooking research. One of my Belt sisters, now mistress, Arwen, she got her Laurel and her Pelican like in the same year. She's one of the first peers of Avical. And she's a real chemistry geek, okay? That's what she does mundanely too.
Yeah.
And
perfect
she's
for cooking.
Oh my God, like ester analysis in different spices, and then she goes back to the historical recipes, and then she analyzes the esters in like powder fort and powder dew, and she's made a really compelling argument that a lot of historical flavors in British and Western European food was a little closer to some of the stuff from India today than what those countries do now. Palates have shifted as more and more then exotic spices and things.
Right.
Yeah, that to me is just like some of those crazy awesome.
Very cool. Yeah, I've done a little bit of research into, not too much, but it's something I have a lot of interest in, is like the medieval cooking. And I remember there's this one, I think it was a peach patina. It was like a Roman dish, and
Mhm.
they put fish sauce and cumin in it
Yes.
for a dessert dish.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now that sounds like absolutely crazy, but I'd love to try it.
I will tell you, because we all struggled with, there was Platna and Pisius were the two early, Roman Greek stuff we could kind of get our hands on back
Hmm.
then. And we struggled over fish sauce. Oh my God. It was like, what is this bizarre secret ingredient that shows up in so many of these dishes, regardless of sweet or savory? And
Oh.
I'm actually reading an anthropology book that talks about how the value of sugar impacted and changed the palates all through Europe. So
Oh.
that one sucrose from
Yeah.
cane sugar and beet sugar compared to honey or any of the other things you would have had as sweeteners before it came in through the Muslim world, through the Arab.
Right.
It's really fascinating and challenging to think about the fact that the way how we actually view sweet and where sweet or salty or something is appropriate is very culturally based.
Yeah.
And we're looking at 1,000-year-old recipes, not necessarily self-aware that, that sounds super weird. But you know what it is? Do you know what this secret Roman fish sauce is? It's the stuff you can buy at any Vietnamese grocery store that they call fish sauce, Nam Noc. And it's
Oh.
sold in bottles commercially, in a concentrate. So
Right.
if you've ever ordered spring rolls in a Vietnamese restaurant, it frequently comes with a very clear little dipping sauce, sometimes little shreds of carrot.
Oh, yeah.
That's the fish sauce. It's Nam Noc and a tiny bit of sugar in it.
Oh,
And
interesting.
you would never be using a lot of it, but it'll give you a bit of a salty. And again, this is the kind of research that Arwen does. It's about the phenolics and the esters, so you
Mm-hmm.
don't pick it up as fish at all.
Okay. Oh, very
But
cool.
in the same way that now the big rage is salt in chocolate, right? Sea salt
Yes.
chocolate bars.
Yep, for
That's
sure.
because in the theobromide in cacao does not stimulate the salt part of your taste buds. Cocoa
Oh.
gets everything else but salt. So somebody, I guess about 20 years ago, because it's a relatively new thing, started to try salt. Not enough to
Mm-hmm.
make you go, this is like a potato chip, but just enough that you go, oh, this is the greatest chocolate in the world. Because it's doing something in an area of your palate, and they've got a low enough level that it's stimulating that part of your
Okay.
you being aware of it, or why it's suddenly, oh my God, this is so good.
Right. Oh,
Same
that's
reason
very
bacon
neat.
chocolate, because it's smoke and sugar.
Right.
Fat,
Oh,
you know.
yes. Fat improves everything.